The clinic always felt different at night. The fluorescents hummed louder, the stainless steel counters gleamed too sharply, and the waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. I told myself I prefer the late shift, fewer clients, fewer crises, but the truth was, it always felt lonelier than it should. I moved through the motions like any other night. A golden retriever with a sour stomach had just gone home with antacids. A hissing tabby sat sedated in recovery after we'd lanced an abscess, and in the corner a rabbit dozed under a blanket as fluids dripped into its tiny leg. Paperwork piled next to me, glowing blue under the desk lamp. I was a year out of school, barely scraping by on night differentials, but it was steady work. And after the last clinic I'd burnt out of, I needed steady. The bell above the front door startled me out of my thoughts. Clients weren't supposed to come this late. Our after-hours number routed to an emergency hospital across town. But a man stumbled in pale and wild-eyed, clutching a shoe box to his chest. He didn't wait for me to greet him. "It's not from here," he blurted, thrusting the box onto the counter. His hand shook so badly the lid rattled. I tried to be calm and professional. "All right, let's have a look." Inside was a cat, or close enough to fool someone glancing quick. Fur meta gray, eyes too wide, chest rising with shallow, uneven breaths, but the teeth were wrong. When it opened its mouth to pant, I saw rows of them, thin and translucent, like a fish's gills sharpened into needles. The man backed away, muttering something about finding it under his porch, about it following him inside. I didn't hear most of it. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing in the box. It looked up at me and then made a sound. Not a usual meow or hiss. It sounded like words strung together in a garbled underwater slurry. Like language itself had drowned inside it. My first thought wasn't that I was hallucinating. It was that the man was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't from here. I carried the shoebox into exam 3. Every muscle in my arms rigid as though the thing might leap out. It didn't. It just lay there, chest fluttering with shallow breaths, pupils contracting and expanding like camera lenses out of sync. Routine first, stethoscope to the chest. Except its heartbeat wasn't routine at all. 1 second it thundered too fast, a hummingbird trapped in bone. The next silence as if its heart simply stopped. I pulled back, waited, pressed again, thud, nothing. I forced myself to move down the body, tracing its spine with my fingers. A cat should have 7 lumbar vertebrae. This thing had 9, or maybe 11. The spacing was uneven, as if someone had added extra bones without understanding how they were supposed to fit together. Blood draw. Then if nothing else, blood would make sense. I loaded the syringe, placed the drop on the slide, and then slid it under the microscope. It didn't look like blood. No red cells, no plasma, just a shifting dark smear that glistened like spilled ink. Threads of green filament drifted through it, curling and uncurling as if alive, like algae teased by invisible currents. My stomach tightened. I logged every detail in the patient file anyway, filling the screen with as much clinical language as I could manage. Pulse irregular, spinal deformity sample inconclusive, recommend follow-up. I added my initials to the bottom as though signing my name made it real. I was still a junior at the place getting experience during the night shift. I liked both the authority and the initiative to take extreme action. So, my idea was to wait for someone more experienced to provide a second opinion and direction on what to do. By the time I looked up, the man who had brought the shoebox was gone. He hadn't even filled out paperwork. The next morning, when I came back for handover, the record was missing. No patient number, no notes, even the placeholder file I'd started had vanished. I asked Dr. Hella, the senior vet, if he'd seen it. He gave me that weary look he reserved for Rockies with questions that wasted his time. "You've been running nights too long." Stress does that. Write it off and move on. I almost believed him, almost. That was until I went to toss the biohazard bin. The shoe box was still there, blood-speckled cores and all, but the animal's body, the nut cat, was gone. For a few nights after the shoebox, things went back to normal, if you could call it that. Sick dogs, cranky cats, rabbits chewing through Roman 4 lines. I almost convinced myself I'd hallucinated the whole thing, that Dr. Hella was right and I was just too tired, too ready to see something bizarre in an ordinary stray. But then another came in. A couple brought their terrier just before midnight, apologizing for the late arrival, swearing that something was wrong with his eyes. Under the exam light, I saw it. Pupils curled in tight spirals, twisting slowly like whirlpools dragging at the edges. The dog wagged his tail, oblivious, but I had to fight the urge to look away before the spiral seemed to pull me in. 2 nights later, a teenager arrived, cradling a cockatiel. It looked fine until it shook, scattering feathers across the table. They writhed on the tile like a nest of beetles, twitching legs where Barb should have been. The bird screamed, a raw rasping sound I'd never heard from anything feathered. By morning, its file was gone too. The worst was the hamster. A kid brought it in after it stopped eating. The X-ray showed a normal skeleton at first glance. Then I leaned closer. The skull held not tiny rodent in sizes, but rows of human, like mers buried crooked in the jaw as though waiting to erupt. Every time the owner said the same thing. It wasn't like this yesterday. Their voices cracked with genuine confusion, fear even, and every time by the next morning the patient files had vanished. No lab samples, no radiographs, nothing but my own memory, insisting these things had been real. I stopped asking Hella about it. His flat stare told me enough. He knew. He'd always known. The clinic was small, with a front desk, 4 exam rooms, a cramped surgery suite, kennels, and storage. After a month of working nights, I thought I knew every corner, every squeaky hinge, every flickering bulb. Which is why it rattled me when I noticed Hella disappearing at closing one evening with a ring of keys I didn't recognize rather than go out the back door. He went down past the kennels behind a supply shelf that scraped just slightly too easily against the floor. I hadn't known there was a basement. That knowledge sat in the back of my mind for a week, festering until the hamster case left me staring at his vanished X-ray and realizing there had to be somewhere those things were going. Somewhere Hella wasn't telling me about. I waited until the clinic was empty, the hum of the soda machine the only sound. The shelf moved with a grunt and a shove, revealing a narrow door. The lock wasn't difficult, just a brittle pad Hella had probably trusted more to secrecy than strength. I told myself I was just curious. I told myself I'd look, then I'd shut it and never try again. The air that hit me was colder, drier, stale. A stairwell of painted concrete led down to a second set of heavier industrial doors, and beyond them the freezers. Rows of them lined the walls taller than me. Doors sweating frost. The handles were tagged not with case numbers or species, but with initials and dates, some recent, some from the 80s, a few from before I was born. I opened one. Inside were jars. Initially, they looked like ordinary tissue samples, the kind we kept for pathology, but the contents weren't ordinary. Lungs that were too smooth, like balloons peeling from their casing, a heart with 5 ventricles, a coiled intestinal tract that pulsed faintly, though the jar was sealed tight. I opened another. This one held a body, taxidermy. I thought for a second until I noticed the stitches were too precise, the eyes replaced by black marbles of resin. It might have been a dog once, or perhaps something that looks like a dog. Its ribs branched upward like slats of an umbrella. I closed the door, fingers numb. My training told me what organs should look like and how they should connect. These didn't. They were close enough to fool someone panicked in an exam room, but wrong in ways my brain couldn't smooth over. Every freezer I opened told the same story. Decades of cases catalogued, stored, hidden, not for research or learning, just contained. At the end of the row stood one different from the others, older. Its door was chained and double padded. Ice crept thick across its seams. I leaned closer. From inside came the faintest scrape, metal against metal, then again, longer like claws dragging slow circles against the frozen walls. I let go of the handle, my breath fogging in the dark, and realized whatever was inside that freezer wasn't dead. 2 nights after I found the freezers, a man came in near closing. He wasn't like the other clients, not frantic with explanation, nor tearful pleas or reassurance that he was fine yesterday, just silence. He dragged a leash behind him. At the end of it was something that had once resembled a dog. Its body looked broken, joints bent at angles they couldn't have healed from, skin stretched in ridges over too many bones, but the eyes, they tracked me with unnerving precision, not the glassy panic of a suffering animal, but something measured watching. Needs boarding, the man said. His voice was flat, unremarkable. He didn't offer paperwork. When I asked for records, he shook his head. No collar, no microchip, just a W of cash pushed across the counter, thick enough to quiet my questions. I forced the smile that I use with difficult clients, at least the name for the chart. He blinked as if he'd never been asked before. Dog, he said finally, and turned for the door. The number he scrolled on the intake form didn't look familiar, but when I dialed it after he left, the phone at the front desk rang. I stood there listening to my own voice on the voicemail, a hollow echo bouncing back. I told myself to log it like normal, but when I tried to create a new file in the system, the cursor blinked against an empty screen. The patient wouldn't save. That night, after lights out, I checked the kennels. The dog hadn't moved from where I left it, curled awkwardly in the far corner. I closed the door, locked up, and went home. By morning, I wished I hadn't. The cage was open, latch undone. The thing was gone, and the room stank. It wasn't the usual suspects of urine or musk like a normal kennel escape, but of theater, sharp and briny, clinging to the walls like a tide had rolled through in the dark. The smell lingered for days, long after I scrubbed the floor, like the ocean itself had left something behind. But I couldn't help but think about the man. Usually the strange anomalies were left by families or those concerned about an injured animal, but this one seemed deliberate, and from our interaction, it felt like I was the only one not in on what was truly going on. Some shifts I was alone or with other juniors, but some shifts were observed. Dr. Ella was with me for a scheduled check of my progress on the job, never hands-on, to see how I handled routine and emergency situations. It came in just after midnight. A woman carried it wrapped in a blanket, murmuring, "Please help him," over and over like a prayer. At first glance, it looked like a stray husky, ribs visible under patchy fur, eyes wild. But when she set it down on the table and peeled back the blanket, I saw its legs bent wrong. Each joint doubled back on itself as though it had been folded. It should not have been able to walk. I took the poor thing into a free exam room to run checks. The moment the needle touched his skin, everything went wrong. It shrieked, not an animal sound, but a pitch that rattled the windows and knocked a tray of instruments clattering to the floor. The overhead light flickered, the air thickened, pressing against my ears until every breath was a rasp. The dog expanded, not in mass, but in presence. Its body blurred, edges and focus like heat rippling off asphalt. The cages in recovery rattled, every patient howling or carrying. "Get back," Hella barked. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. He was already moving faster than I thought a man his age could. From beneath the supply cabinet, he dragged equipment I didn't recognize. Metal canisters with faded hazard symbols, syringes filled with liquid so dark it looked black. A mask that didn't resemble any veterinary kit I had ever been trained to use. Hold the line, he muttered, to me, to himself, I couldn't tell. Then he plunged the syringe into the creature's neck. It thrashed, eyes bulging in their sockets, but the pressure in the room broke all at once, the air snapping thin and cold. Light steadied, the cages went still. The husky lay motionless on the table, chest rising only once every few seconds, like the bare minimum of life was being allowed to continue. Hella slumped into the chair by the counter, sweat slick on his forehead despite the chill. For a long time, the only sound was the drip of saline from a line I'd abandoned. Finally, he spoke, voice cracked. It's happening more often. The seals are failing. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I knew. The words weren't meant for himself. They were for me. We didn't speak until hours later. The husky, if you could call it that, was locked away in an isolation kennel, sedated into half-life. I was still shaking when I found Hella in his office, staring at a folder thick with yellowed papers. He didn't tell me to leave. He didn't even look up. They're not strays, he said finally. His voice was flat, not an apology, not even a warning, just fact. Fair breaches. I waited for him to elaborate, but the silence stretched so long I almost thought he wouldn't. Then he slid the folder across the desk. Inside were patient records unlike anything in the system. Polaroids of animals with limbs bent in circles, autopsy sketches marked with impossible notes, jars of organs photographed in sterile light. The clinic's affront, he said, always has been one of dozens, maybe hundreds janitor sites, they called us. Back in the 50s, after the first surge, someone in a government office realized what was slipping through wasn't going away. So they funded us. Quiet money, quiet contracts, put people like me in place to keep things clean. He tapped one of the pages with a trembling finger, a chart. Thin black lines plotted across decades, each spike taller than the last. Each decade worse. They told us half. Truths. Always enough to keep us working, not enough to scare us off. But the breaches, they're accelerating. It used to be once a year, maybe twice. Now he shook his head. Every week, sometimes every night, when containment fails, his hand tightened around the edge of the desk until the wood groaned. I thought of the freezers downstairs, the things in jars, the scraping behind the locked door. We're not vets, Hella said, finally looking at me. His eyes were red, but there was no motion in them, just exhaustion with filters. Things slipped through. We cleaned them up. That's the job. He clicked the monitor on. Security footage flickered across the screen. Last night's kennels, still and silent. For a moment, nothing. Then a single frame where every animal, every patient blinked at once, perfectly synchronized. I recoiled. Hella didn't even flinch. I'm Neil. The end, he said, voice low. Somebody has to take over. And whether you like it or not, he closed the folder with a soft thud. It's you. The weight of it settled on me with the certainty of a death sentence. I wasn't just treating animals anymore. I was inheriting a war. For a day, I convinced myself I wouldn't play along. I wanted this work my whole life, to heal, to save, to hand animals back to their families with tails wagging and purr vibrating against my hands. Not to keep files in locked cabinets, not to drag cages into basement, not to silence living things because they didn't belong here. So I told myself I'd quit. I turn in my keycard, erase every late night horror as exhaustion and bad memory, and start fresh somewhere that didn't smell of antiseptic and secrets. But the next night, a little girl came in with her mother. She held a carrier in both arms, eyes wet, whispering, "Please, he's sick." Inside was a cat, black, scrawny, pupils too wide. For a moment it almost passed for normal. Then it shifted, its skin pulsing like something inside was pushing to get out. I'd seen enough now to recognize it instantly, a breach. The The mother signed forms, wiped the girl's cheeks, and left them both in the waiting room. They didn't know. They would never know. In the back, Hella stood with his arms folded. No tools this time, no intervention, just his voice, low and certain. Put it down, log it, file it away, or walk out that door and pretend you never saw what's under the surface. The words scraped against everything I thought I was. I froze, hand hovering above the carrier, my chest itched with the urge to run. I could walk out. They'd never stopped me. Then the cat's back rippled, vertebrae bending against skin. Its mouth opened wide, far wider than bone should allow, and something inside flickered, a shimmer like the edge of a hole widening. I understood in that second why Hella did what he did, why the freezers existed, why the charts only climbed. I drew the syringe, my hands trembled, but I injected anyway. The breech let out a thin hiss like air leaking from a tire and collapsed into stillness. Not a traumatic death, not a monster vanquished, just silence unceremonious. I logged it, filed it, moved on, and in that moment I understood the clinic's rhythm. Horror became procedure, saving became disposal. Weeks bled together. The clinic never really closed. The lobby stayed bright, the phones kept ringing, and people came in with the same anxious faces, clutching leashes, crates, and shoe boxes. Most of them were ordinary pets, of course, vomiting dogs, constipated cats, a parrot with a broken wing, but not all, and I learned eventually not to flinch when a not all came through the door. My hands moved without thinking now, fill out forms, prep syringes, sterilize tables, and label jars. Normal steps in a process that had stopped feeling normal. I logged specimens the same way I logged vaccinations. I cleaned instruments the same way I'd once cleaned up after dental surgeries on geriatric spaniels. Horror dulled into muscle memory. Habit layered over revulsion like scar tissue. Some nights I still heard the scraping in the basement freezes. Some nights I saw the charts in my dreams, the line climbing higher with each decade, never flattening. But I stopped trying to argue with it. They're not strays, I caught myself thinking one night, or closing up files. They're breaches and we're not vets. We're custodians. This is just what the world needs to keep turning. I believed it, or at least I made myself believe it. It was almost dawn when the bell over the door chimed. I looked up, expecting another last-minute emergency. It wasn't a frantic family this time. It was him, the man with a flat voice, the cash, the leash dragging behind him, the same one who had left me a dog, that Ryer of theatre. He didn't speak as he set the carrier on the counter, just met my eyes with a kind of tired patience, as if he knew I would take it without question, and I did. I pulled down the gloves, reached for a fresh chart, wrote nothing down. Whatever was inside the carrier shifted once, just enough to scrape against the plastic, and I carried it into the back without another word.